Hello everyone, it's Daniel, Innovation Lead from Formula5. In this video, I would like to talk about our accelerator for Azure AD B2C. If you think about building or implementing modern SIAM solution or customer identity access management solution, probably one of the services you would like to look at is Azure AD B2C. So Azure AD B2C is a powerful customer identity access management solution available in the Microsoft Azure cloud that can handle millions of users and billions of authentications every day. It's really flexible service. It's basically built to secure your customer-facing applications and solutions. It's really flexible because you can not only customize the look and feel of login or registration pages, but also you can integrate Azure AD B2C with external systems and APIs. So it means that you can inject some data from external systems into tokens that will be returned to end applications. However, when implementing Azure AD B2C, you can face some challenges. So, Azure AD B2C tenant creation is a simple thing. You open Azure portal, you create Azure AD B2C tenant, then you think like, okay, tenant is created, then I will create some user flows, I will register applications there, and we are ready to go. However, there are some challenges. It's important to properly configure security controls to make sure that tenant is well secured. It can be challenging to configure all required user flows like login or registration. You can think about the situation when you would like to customize some flows like login flow or registration flow. There can be a need to configure multi-factor authentication or conditional access. So in this case, you will need additional configuration in your tenant. There can be a need to implement deployment automation for user flows. So you don't want to always manually deploy user flows or custom policies. You want to create automation for that. And there can be many other challenges when it comes to Azure AD B2C implementation. This is why at Formula5 we decided to create Azure Active Directory B2C Accelerator. It was built using our whole knowledge we gained over the years of implementing Azure AD B2C solutions. So, what is Azure AD B2C Accelerator created by Formula5? Formula5 Accelerator for Azure AD B2C enables quick Azure AD B2C tenant creation with all security controls in place. Automatic configuration of Identity Experience Framework to use custom policies. Automatic deployment for login pages with conditional access enabled to support MFA if needed. Look and feel customization for login, registration, password reset, and profile edit pages. Easy integration with external services and APIs, and monitoring and insights about platform usage like failed user authentication operations. Great! That's it about theory. Now it's time to see this accelerator in practice. Here is the project of accelerator in the Azure DevOps and Git repository where we store all the components like scripts and infrastructure templates for our accelerator. It's worth to mention that it doesn't have to be Azure DevOps. It can be any other DevOps tool, like GitHub for instance. Now, to deploy and configure Azure AD B2C tenant, it is required to create a variable group where we will specify parameters like the tenant name, the Azure AD B2C tenant name, the resource group where the tenant will be deployed, the subscription ID, so the subscription that will be connected to Azure AD B2C tenant. But also here we have to specify global admin username and password. With this account, we will be able to successfully deploy Azure AD B2C tenant. But you can ask, hey Daniel, we don't want to store any credentials for our global admins in Azure DevOps or any other DevOps tool. That's not a problem, because our accelerator was created in modular way. So it means that you can basically create Azure AD B2C tenants manually from the Azure portal, for instance, and then use our accelerator to configure Identity Experience Framework, deploy custom policies, or configure conditional access policies. Great! So now it's time to see the deployment pipeline for the Azure AD B2C tenant. Here is the Formula5 AD B2C tenant deployment pipeline. When I will click Run button, we can see that there are two stages. The first one is called create and the second one configure. So now in the create stage, we are going to create Azure AD B2C tenant and we are going to configure all the security controls. Like for instance, we will decide who can invite users to this tenant. And also we will register management application, so then we can configure this tenant through Microsoft Graph API. So the whole configuration, like identity experience framework configuration or deployment of the custom policies, will happen in the configure stage. So now let's wait for a while and then see once this pipeline is executed. Perfect. After some time, our Azure AD B2C tenant is successfully created and configured. So now let's discuss the steps in this pipeline. What are the steps in the create stage? First of all, we are creating Azure AD B2C tenant. Once it's successfully created, we have to create Azure AD B2C management application. We have to register a new application in this newly created tenant to make it possible to authenticate to Microsoft Graph and then execute different operations and calls on the Microsoft Graph API. So once management application is registered, then we configure Azure AD B2C security controls, like the settings for external users or who can invite people to this specific tenant. Once this stage, create stage, is successfully completed, then the configure stage is executed. So the first thing here is to configure identity experience framework. We want to use custom policies. So in this case, the identity experience framework has to be configured. Once it's configured properly, then we want to configure conditional access policies. So in this step, we are going to deploy 3 conditional access policies templates that can be then configured within the tenant in a specific way, if needed. Once conditional access policies templates are deployed, then we want to deploy custom policies. So in this case, as you can see, we are deploying base policy, localization policy, extensions policy, and sign up or sign in custom policy. Once this deployment is successfully completed, we want to also delete Azure AD B2C management application because it will be not required anymore. Perfect. So right now, it's time to see this newly created Azure AD B2C tenant. Here is our newly created Formula5 B2C demo tenant. As we can see here, it was successfully deployed. Under Identity Experience Framework, we can see that the custom policies were deployed automatically and successfully. Under Policy Keys, we can see that all the required policy keys are registered to use Identity Experience Framework. When we open App Registrations tab, we can see that all applications that are required were registered successfully, like Identity Experience Framework application. And in this configuration, we can start using Azure AD B2C tenant. If we open Conditional Access section, we can also notice that 3 conditional access policies templates were deployed. So all apps MFA for all users when medium or high sign-in risk, all apps MFA and password reset for all users when high user risk, and also Azure Portal MFA for administrators. So those 3 policies templates are automatically deployed with our Formula5 accelerator for the Azure AD B2C. And obviously, their state is report only. You can enable them, you can configure them accordingly to your needs, but they have the specific configuration that will be probably most often used within your tenant. Perfect. So now when we will open the another tab within this tenant, we can also see that under user settings, we configure all the security controls. So when it's loaded, I want to show you that, for instance, under default user role, we disabled this possibility for the users to register applications, and we restrict non-admin users from creating tenants. And also users cannot create security groups. So The whole configuration was applied using Accelerator from the Azure DevOps. Perfect. So right now, once this tenant is successfully deployed and configured, we can focus on login or registration page customization, but we don't have to worry about security controls, identity experience framework configuration, conditional access policies deployment, and so on. The tenant is ready for you to focus on your goal, on your requirements when it comes to login and registration process for your customers. If you want to learn more about our accelerator for the Azure AD B2C, I strongly recommend visiting our website under Formula5.com. If you have any questions and you would like to talk to us, do not hesitate to use Contact Us form available on our website. We are here at Formula5 to help you build secure and modern SIAM solutions with Azure AD B2C. Thank you so much for watching.